Okay, everyone, welcome back. Another Unstuck. We've had a lot of interesting conversations in these recent weeks, and got another one for you today. Adam Chambers, digital surgeons. Those of you who have not seen these before, we've been running these. I've been running these for years and years. Literally, I think the first one was 17 years ago in Manhattan. They used to be in person. They used to be private. They are all just conversations. Informal, very informal, as you see, conversations exploring an individual's journey on their professional path and just looking at the kind of human side of that journey. So that's what you've walked into if you happen to just stumble onto this randomly. So Adam, thank you again for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't realize you've been doing these for 17 years. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so again, the people I used to work with, by their nature, they're working on some sort of innovation, some sort of breakthrough, right? Entrepreneurs, corporate folks working in very kind of, specific area of their organization, working in some kind of skunk works on some big industry transformation And so one of the things I found that was valuable is people like that rarely, particularly back then, pre-social media era, pre really even, when I think back pre-internet era, to a certain degree, not that 2001, 2, 3 we didn't have internet, but it was a different thing in terms of our connection, right?
Certainly.
And so because they were in isolated corners of their organizations working on this kind of crazy thing, or they were entrepreneurs working on this crazy thing by themselves with 2, 3 other people, maybe there just wasn't a community. And so I started doing these things as private forums. So we'd have like 6 or 8 people, private session. They likely wouldn't know each other. Sometimes they would, but they were all clients or former clients of mine. And one person would be in the hot seat. And we do this. We just have a conversation and just explore what's going on for you. It's almost like, entrepreneurship therapy session with an audience, right? But it wasn't designed to. It's just to humanize, and then people see, oh, okay, they're going through the same crap I am, and
Right.
So that's what it started at. Really, it was a way to support people who, by nature of what they were doing, could feel very isolated in their journey, and to just kind of show that anybody doing this kind of journey is got the same kind of human concerns. That was the original kind of kernel of it.
You were essentially doing podcasts before podcasts were a thing.
Kind of, I guess, but it was private though. It's private, right? So we wouldn't kind of send it out to the world. And then we started doing them more publicly, and then I went dark for a few years, and then we came to District. Actually, even before District, we were doing them around New Haven in different restaurants. We did them for a while. And then when District opened up, we started doing them here out in the lounge. And then latest iteration is this. Pre-recording them became necessary during COVID, and I think we may actually stick to this. I kind of like the different kinds of freedom this allows. Yeah,
that's awesome. I mean, I've only been in the kind of New Haven area for just over 8 years now, but that sounds very New Haven to me. Having conversations about innovation and creativity in restaurants.
That's it. Yeah. We for a period of time we were doing it with Bun's Place, the sushi restaurant, the sustainable sushi restaurant, and
love that place.
Yeah. So it involved lots of alcohol, not just food, because you can't be in Bun's Place without there being a lot of alcohol. So let's dive in. Here's my first question for you. And invariably, for these things, I always only plan 1 or 2 questions, and then intentionally no more, so that I can just go with the conversation. And 80% of the time, even the 1 or 2 questions I have immediately gets derailed by either something the person says up front or something else. And in this case, it's the something else is your children in the background there. So I didn't know you were a guitar player. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So I've been a musician since a very early age. In fact, I know for a fact that my parents have very embarrassing footage of me as a very young kid, writing music and writing songs. So it really has been a part of my life the entire time.
Right.
Have tattooed on my arms just to prove to everybody. But yeah, you can see what's behind me. In front of me, I'm actually in my studio right now, which is in the attic of my house. Okay. So I have 3 synthesizers in total. I'm using my sound card. So yeah, music has been a major part of my life. And it's kind of what led me into my career, really, because I've always been interested in the kind of technical side of music. So, when I was very young, it was just kind of writing songs, playing guitar. And as I got older, I got very interested in the kind of science behind audio.
Mhm.
And I went to university to study music technology. And that's kind of where I found the art of programming and software engineering, because they're actually very tightly coupled. And in some ways, it's kind of gone full circle with a lot of the kind of artistic stuff I do today. I've kind of been able to marry my two passions of music and software engineering. But yeah, I play guitar. I would say is my main instrument. I also do a lot of production.
Mm.
Try and play keys where I can, bit of
Yeah.
drums.
Right.
But yeah, I've got three guitars over there. The other one's just out of sight. But I like to
Interesting.
show off the two Fenders. You
That's
play
it.
yourself?
So yeah. Well, it's interesting. So my undergrad degree, I've joked over the years that I'm the last generation of Indian males for whom this is true, and it actually is literally true. 49% of the men my age studied medicine. 49% studied some version of engineering. And then the crazy, radical, rebellious 2% became PhD chemists. That was open rebellion. If you didn't go into medicine or engineering and you went to do a PhD in some science, I was like, oh my God, I studied sound engineering. So yeah. So I was like totally off the reservation. I studied sound engineering, world music. And then like after my sophomore year, just to have my mother, stop wringing her hands, I did a minor in electrical engineering just so she could say, he's studying electrical engineering. It's fine. Yeah.
That's funny. Wow, I can't believe we've never talked about that before.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's why I smiled when you said that. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So and the engineering side of music, I would say, is my real passion, and I still do that today. I still make a lot of music. I have a friend who's a vocalist, and we kind of make it together. And yeah, I mean, really, when I'm not working and not making software, building apps, in my studio making music, it really is. It's my form of meditation. It's how I escape the world, and yeah, it's my deepest form of creativity, for
Yeah.
sure. But do you still make music then, or are you still involved in audio?
No, so I dropped it fairly quickly after. So it did not. The technical side of production just did not stick for me. I wound up meeting a professor who's an ethnomusicologist who became kind of my mentor. I wound up doing a thesis path instead of the other options that were available as an undergrad, and so I did a thesis on. Here's a practical way to ensure job security. I did my senior thesis, like the bulk of my senior year, on court music and philosophy of Warring States era China, 500 BC to 300 AD.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, like good luck getting a job after that, right? I mean, you talk about like English degrees and whatnot. Now I got that beat. But the technical side, like I had to, we had to produce a bunch of stuff and had to learn instruments as all part of the degree. And found it fascinating, found it interesting, but it wasn't life calling for me. I just remained interested in the things that previously had my interest, and that music fulfills a piece of. But really, it was the kind of more philosophical inquiries into what makes humans humans, and
Right.
how they choose their their existences and how they find meaning and all those things, right? And music is a great place to explore those things. But the
Gotcha.
music production itself wasn't the thing for me, right? So I became a lifelong consumer, but not,
Yeah.
not a producer. I've collected drums over the years. I collect percussion instruments, and so I have a bunch of those at home. I'll play those regularly just to let off steam and to
Yeah.
and then I'll buy new electronic gadgets that come out because I get curious. Little pads and devices that are like, wow, that seems amazing.
Yeah.
And play with that for a while and produce some silly music, but nothing nothing I would call an actual craft. Not a practice.
Right. But isn't that kind of fascinating in a way that we could have both essentially studied the same topic, right? Music technology, sound engineering, very, very similar, but completely different ends of the spectrum really there. I mean, I was really fascinated in, like, sounds really nerdy, but like the math side of audio. So, I mean, I can remember very clearly, how I first got into programming was figuring out how to engineer my own distortion, because I
Hmm.
was fascinated with the fact that it's just changing the vibrations in the air, right? It's just manipulating the frequencies, the vibrations in the air, in order to create what we hear as effects and what we hear as, delay or echo or distortion. And so I started experimenting with, Java programming language to see how I could create my own distortion. I've always been a metalhead over here. But yeah, very like the opposite end of the spectrum to you. But yeah, that's music.
So I actually I'm going to take a leap, and I don't think it's too big of a leap, and connect that to actually kind of the technology world in general. But just when you say metalhead, have you heard the Who? HU?
The Who HU? Yes, I wouldn't say I'm not well versed, but yeah, I know of
The Mongolian heavy metal band.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I love it. I literally December of 2019 is when I first heard them, and I got in touch with their management. I wanted to try to figure out a way to bring them to one of the venues in New Haven. Like I get silly about stuff like that. I get hooked on something, and yeah. So
well, I tell you, like I said earlier, that also sounds very New Haven to me.
yeah.
I've seen some very interesting bands in the city of New Haven for sure.
That's
It's a great place for music.
It's a phenomenal place for music.
Yeah.
We're trying to make District one of those hubs for music this year. So let me go back to what you were saying about kind of the fact that we had similar kind of origins, and yet you're branching in different directions. So I'm not a technologist in terms of practice, right? I run a coding school here, among other things, but I am not a coder. I'm not a computer scientist, any stretch of it, and yet, working in entrepreneurial spaces, and you certainly know a lot of folks in that world, have worked in that world a lot. One of the things I could note about people who get really passionate about tech is similar to what you noted about music. Some of them are just really into the actual technical making of the thing, and others are more interested in the conceptual. Like, and we just had David just brought somebody down around here who's an entrepreneur, and he's like, yeah, I don't code, but I've got 30 coders. All his ideas are in the technology space. All his ideas involve computer science. And so he loves it. He doesn't love doing it.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And so I'm curious, for you kind of being in that world, what do you find is the advantage of being kind of in the weeds of technology in a good way, right? Like actually being into the coding side of it, that folks who are more conceptual might miss, and then can you see anything being in the weeds that you might miss, or the people who are more into actually coding might miss, that the kind of conceptually related to technology might be seeing?
Yeah, well, great question. I mean, as you were kind of articulating that, I was thinking, I definitely code less these days than I did in the past, right? I think that's very common for engineers as they sort of progress through their career. I lead a team of, front end, back end engineers, data analysts, and MarTech specialists. I lead a team now. That doesn't mean I don't still roll my sleeves up and work on products with my team. I definitely do, and it's my intention to keep it that way. But I'm certainly code less than I used to.
Right.
I think there's pros and cons to both, right? So I think a very common issue that engineers get caught up in, and in fact, I've spoken at Holbert in your coding school that you just mentioned there a few times about this, is people get caught up in the language or the framework or the tools that they're using to build the thing, right? And they forget that at the end of the day, the important thing really is what you're making. It is the end users that are going to be using that application.
Right.
So I think it's very easy to over-engineer, and I see that a ton. Spending far too long on things that don't really matter, when what you can actually do is just get something to work, right? And so I've always been interested in kind of design iteration, the kind of idea of MVPs and building upon them from there. In fact, I showed you the tattoo earlier. It's an F-hole, and you probably know the history of that, but it's something that's been a work in progress for a long, long time, finding kind of the optimal way to reverberate air on wooden instruments. So I think it's very easy to kind of spend far too much time and get lost in the weeds on something that actually isn't that big a deal. I talk to engineers a lot. This is certainly something I've spoken to your students about, which is not treating technologies like sports teams, right? Which we see a lot these days. Like people are very tied to a specific framework or a specific way of building things. I'm a React developer or I'm a JavaScript developer. And at DS we often talk about the difference between a developer and an engineer. And we like to think that a developer is a coder, an engineer is somebody that builds things, and they'll choose the right tool for the right job and make a product. So I think it's very easy when you are in the weeds on code to end up using far too much of your time and effectively budget thinking about things that probably don't matter too much.
Right.
But likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, I think it can be easy to gloss over how complex things are.
Right.
And also, we live in a world now where there's so many tools that enable people to make applications, right? The kind of no code movement, no code, low code. It's very easy to bootstrap a business online today. And that's awesome and also a little bit dangerous at times, I think, right? Because I think you can make mistakes that if you try and scale too quickly on, a piece of software that hasn't had the kind of engineering, it hasn't had that kind of focus on architecture from an early stage, you can scale too quickly and the product you built doesn't support it anymore. So I think it's important to try and position yourself somewhere in the center. And I really encourage my engineers at Digital Surgeons to think that way. It's like we aren't just obsessed with code, although we love coding and there is an art to code. Code is poetry, as we like to say. But you have to think about the end products at the end of the day. So I know that answers the question, but I think there's pros and cons to both, and I try to keep myself very much in the center.
Yeah. So it does answer the question, and the last line opens up then something else. Code is poetry.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the conversations I have with not students here, but in my leadership program, pretty frequently is the nature of language. And I don't want to get into a whole side discussion here, but just as a placeholder, that reality is constructed in language, right? And so mastery of language allows you to master certain types of reality. And so if you have a real mastery in physics, there are realities you can engage with, right? That you can't engage with if you don't have a fluency in that language.
Right.
And you can have jargon in that language, and you can, but real fluency matters. And even human languages, you can read translations of Rilke, right? But reading it in German is a different phenomenon, because there are things you can say in German that just do not translate. You can come close, you can approximate, but they don't translate. So what it does is, being able to speak German allows you to think a certain way that you can't think in other languages. Speaking in English, so you get the point, right? So code is poetry is fascinating to me, because it acknowledges a relationship with code as a language to create with. And so I'd love for you to tease out more. When you say code is poetry, what do you, and beyond the obvious, I can make digital stuff, right? What can you express in code that is tough for you as a human being to express? Like you can express things on a guitar that you can't express maybe in words. What can you express in code that in your experience is tougher for you to express in other places?
Yeah. Just quickly, it's interesting you mentioning the translations there. I watched a really good YouTube video. I just kind of stumbled upon it down an internet rabbit hole of why Shakespeare only works in English, right? It's because of the iambic pentameter, I think it's called, right? But you don't have that in French, right? The stress is on the final syllable. So Shakespeare doesn't work in French, which I think is a really interesting concept. But yeah, to answer your question, there's a lot of nuance in programming. Almost, most programming languages have many ways of going about creating the same thing. And I don't know if you ever watched the show Silicon Valley, the comedy, but
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
So they have this kind of bit that they keep coming back to of tabs versus spaces, and it's this whole kind of thing in programming where you can use tabs or spaces to kind of organize your code, essentially to indent your code, to kind of to visualize how logic operates. And so you have to have some kind of way of indenting. That's just kind of a standard in programming. but you can use tabs or spaces to do it. And it, certain ideas around whether it should be tabs or spaces fit better with different groups. And there's a ton of different ways to go about building things. And I think people become quite attached to different methodologies. And I've had, full-blown arguments sometimes with engineers about, different ways to go about building it and whether that's the right syntax. I mean, it's the same kind of terminology we use in programming as with like the written word. We say syntax or programming syntax. And so I think because there's so many different ways to express the same piece of logic, that you essentially are expressing yourself, right? Like I have a way of writing JavaScript code that somebody else may not like, or may have a different approach that they prefer. Both achieve the same end goal, but it's a different way of going about it. And so I think it is very expressive, especially if you do use a language like JavaScript, where it's, this can be a bad thing at times, but there's not too much structure around it. So you kind of are left free to just build the thing in the way you want to. And so you're essentially, you're creating, you're building, and you're architecting something in the way that you wish. And I think that really is that's expression, right? Almost by definition. So code as poetry has been around for a long time. I'm not really sure where that phrase was first coined. It's a big part of the WordPress code base. You see it all the time in the WordPress world. It's been around for a long time. And I really do think it comes down to the fact that there are 100 ways to make the same application. And so you really do express yourself in the way that you decide to build that thing.
Yeah, that's great. It's counter to what I think the kind of common understanding of what coders do is. I think folks who've never encountered computer science, encountered coding, I think there's still a fairly persistent mythology that, oh, okay, you sit at a terminal, you're some version of kind of, math head nerdy, and you're just,
right.
executing. It's a very linear, robotic sort of thing. But my experience is similar. Again, I don't do the work, but just hanging out with people, that it is as much kind of creativity and this kind of sense of equal finality. There's no one path to get, and so there's a lot of opportunity for kind of expression, right?
Yeah, I really believe in that. I think technology in general, and especially programming, is a creative art. It really is. I think in the industry that we're in, that Digital Surge is in the kind of advertising world, we think of creative as art and copy, which is also extremely creative. And then technology is production. It's making the thing that the creatives have put together. So I'm not knocking those arts either. It's a very creative endeavor to be in copywriting or in art direction. But it definitely, in my opinion, technology is a creative endeavor, because you aren't just following a set of instructions, you are creating the instructions for the computer to run. So it really is very, very expressive. And there are, no matter what you're making, really, there's many ways to go about it. Some are more optimal than others. There's often pros and cons of different approaches, right? You're kind of optimizing for scale versus efficiency, or there's lots of different things that go into what you're making. And when you start making a project, you really do start with a blank file in a text editor, and you start writing the code for your application. So to me, there's really not many things that are more creative than that, And so I really do think that technologists are creatives just as much as artists or copywriters or any of those arts.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So then what, obviously my big commitment here and on other fronts is human development in general, and these days exclusively human development in younger populations, right? And we've kind of reached even all the way back to high school with some new programs. And one of the ongoing work that we need to do is not developing the skills, but developing the context and the relevance, right? Everything you just said, right? Just what does this life even mean? What does it open up? How do you spend your time, right? So you've been doing this for a while, right? You're I don't know how old you are. You don't have to tell us, but you've been at this for a bit, as they say, right? This, you know, you're not 3 years into your career, right?
No.
So yeah, so you've kind of been immersed in it long enough. Given what you can see in terms of where technology is, and all of the things that are opening up, right? If you were advising somebody who's 17 right now, 16, and seeing, I mean, it's insane, all of the kinds of things that are just about to explode in terms of new technologies, right? With machine learning, with virtual spaces, immersive space, like all, and we could spend a few dozen sessions just unpacking all of that. But if you were talking to a 17-year-old, 16-year-old, public high school here in New Haven, has exposure to none of this, right? What would you want to tell them about why this kind of path might be interesting to pursue? Of all the things you could tell them, what would you tell them in terms of why this is an interesting path to spend your life on?
I think because there is so much change and opportunity in the world of technology, right? It's constantly changing. And so you really are just you're getting involved in an industry that's very open, and you're constantly going to be doing new things. I mean, it makes me think to literally just earlier today, actually, someone I mentored reached out to me on Slack and said, like, how did you decide what technologies you wanted to work with? And I said, I didn't, and I still don't know. And that's the wrong way to think about it. It really is. Like, I mean, sure, if you're extremely interested in machine learning and that's 100% where you want to focus your time, I can understand that. But I think a better approach is like, what type of products do I want to make? Like, what type of industries am I interested in helping evolve? Because the technologies come and go. I mean, you're right. It's no secret. I'm 34. I've been, doing this professionally since I was 18, and I've been, making apps and stuff like that for well before that too. And so many different frameworks and libraries and ways of making apps have come and gone, and they're constantly going to. Especially, I work on the web, moving at lightning pace. So I think what I would say to a 17-year-old is, I mean, not only do you have the chance to change the world with the innovation and technologies that we're creating, the opportunities are ever changing, and just in the last few years, the number of innovations and new spaces that you just mentioned have opened up. That's going to be constantly evolving for at least for a decent period of time. Yeah. So I just think it's a fascinating landscape to work in, the technical landscape, and you really are you're innovating, you're pushing humanity forward. Right. And for the most part, depending on the industry you're in, I guess, you are helping change the world. And I think that's really powerful. So that's probably what I'd say. There's not many industries like that, to be honest. Constantly rapidly evolving, and lots of opportunity to really make a difference.
Yeah. So we've actually, despite being in the building together for 4 years, we've actually not spent a lot of time together. But one of the senses I've always gotten about you is that you're, you have a fairly high degree of clarity about your values, and kind of how you spend your attention and focus and all that, right? One of the big things I try to reinforce here is that technology is not values neutral. Inherently, technology is not values neutral. And so the silly example I use with brand new kind of I say, when you think of the word secretary, what do you normally, what's one of the first words that comes to your mind, right? And one of the first 2 or 3 words for everybody is woman. We have this association, secretary, and then I say, okay, great. Who are you?
I'm Siri. But enough about me.
Siri, Alexa, Google Voice, all female voices. And so subconsciously, nobody at Apple's sitting there, kind of with an evil intent of, let's continue to suppress women. But absent a really overt understanding of the values that you bring to the work, we start designing digital assistants that all have female voices, and that subconsciously reinforce something that we might not reinforce if we actually thought about it, right? Yeah. And so I try to enforce that technology is not values neutral. The decisions that technologists make have systemic impact, right? And so as somebody who again, I think my senses has a pretty strong values clarity and kind of operates out of there, What's that navigation been like for you in so what, 16 years, you said 18 to 34, 16 years of working in this space? Because I can imagine working on code and even working as an engineer, stepping back, it's really easy to get excited about the thing and lose context for, okay, what are the impacts and implications, right? So how have you navigated, how are you navigating, the values and the work?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and very difficult. And a similar example that came to mind while you were describing that is machine learning algorithms doing like facial recognition, recognizing white men better than any other. And I think you're right. I don't think it's like intentional. I think it's subconsciously putting I don't know, I kind of inner thoughts into the thing we're creating. And, unfortunately, the technology space is dominated by white men. So that's how those machine learning algorithms have grown. And I think there's, this big push to change that right now. But to answer your question, it's difficult. I mean, there's lots of controversial technology right now. I mean, if you look at, the world of machine learning and AI and deep fakes, and this is fascinating technology. It really, really is. But it can be and already has been used for bad. So it's a really difficult question to answer. I think I'm not really sure how I approach it. I think you have to constantly think about what this thing could be used for. And I think Elon Musk talks about this a lot, like the need for regulation in AI. And as somebody that's such an innovator and such an entrepreneur, that's kind of a strange thing for them to say, right? Normally you would want less regulation so you can innovate freely and create what you want. But I think he's right? Especially in the AI space, there is a need for regulation on this stuff because we are, said it earlier, we are moving at a lightning pace. And so I do think that there needs to be, Google has its like ethics board, although that's been through some trials and tribulations recently. I do think we need to make sure that we devote time and attention to make sure that what we're creating, what we're innovating is being used for the right things. Because really any technology can be used for good and equally for bad. So I think the way you phrased it is very correct. And I think we just have to be careful in how we use that technology and who's in control of it. But it's a very difficult question, and it's going to get more difficult over time. As we get more and more advanced. I don't know if you've seen any of the like deep fake videos of like Barack Obama and things like that. Like that's scary. There's that could cause some major disruption in the world in the future. So yeah, I don't know. That's not a very good answer. It's scary, and I think we just have to be very, very careful.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think just the attention on it is at bare minimum what we need to keep focusing on. Is just constantly asking the question. Before we went live here, actually, you raised it, I think, Clubhouse, right? So Clubhouse app is fascinating, right? So there are, at this point, 10 million people on. It's insane. The average user is on for 3.2 hours a day is the last number I saw. That's like through the roof, and it's active engagement, right? Well, Clubhouse records all of the rooms. Now they record them for liability purposes. If somebody is being inflammatory, if somebody's being threatening, if somebody's using racial or other inappropriate language. The idea is you can report, they can go back to the servers and listen in, and that's what they say the purpose is. But the reality is, one of the bleeding edges of tech is, I think, really understanding the contextual cues in verbal communication to really be able to accelerate this natural language programming, these kind of voice-based bots, right? So I get on that platform, and part of me can't help but think, I'm helping, to contribute to refining, deepfake audio somewhere down the road, or giving AI really human speech ability by being one of the millions and billions of hours worth of audio data that can get analyzed to help refine this stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, and I said Elon Musk has said that we need regulation, but who is in charge of that regulation? Do we put governments in charge of that? Then we end up with things like PRISM and the whole there would be a lot of benefit to governments being able to track and listen and analyze Clubhouse data. Right. So who do we put in charge of this? Who do we put in charge of monitoring what Clubhouse are doing with that audio? I didn't in fact know that they recorded it. That's actually really interesting, and I would almost guarantee that they're doing some form of analysis on that, right? It's not just sitting on a server somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, why wouldn't they? I mean, that's every business is a data business, right? In their business, it's audio data. Why wouldn't you be using that? Particularly given the people that back that thing. I mean, that's Peter Thiel, it's Andrew Horowitz. Those guys are
the value of data for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Now that we're making anybody who's listening suitably paranoid, let's
yeah. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah. And we're actually crawling up. I try to be respectful of people's time and kind of keep it to the amount of time we promised. So,
wow. Time flies.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to be respectful. I also know you said this is the end of your day, so I don't want to keep you from the guitars either.
Yeah. So I'm actually meeting with a business partner, but it's in a more casual setting.
Yeah. You got it. So let me ask you about. If we get away from the kind of potential things that can go wrong with technology, right? What's got you excited, right? So you spoke about kind of furthering humanity and technology really being a means to again further humanity, support human beings. What's got you excited in your work, or more in general in tech? What's got you the most excited about how technology can really help us with some of the issues that we have in the world?
So I think so I've always been fascinated with the web, right? And I think the main reason for that is kind of an open platform, open standards that help connect people. And I think it's no secret that the web shrunk the world, right? Suddenly we all felt closer together. And I think that kind of idea has always been close to my heart, like living on the other side of the world from my family, right? It's my wife and I live out here, and the rest of my family have a very kind of close-knit family, live in the UK. And the internet, social media, communication, FaceTime, things like that help with that. It would have been much more difficult to move to the other side of the world from your family, 10 years ago. So even more, I guess. So those technologies that help people connect fascinate me. And I think with the year that we had last year and the year that we're still having right now has brought more people online, right? Everyone's working remote. We're currently doing this remote. I make music and do creative tech with Pete Center, who you know very well, and we do that remote now. We do that over Zoom as well. And so I'm fascinated with the world of VR, AR, and how social platforms can bring people together. Like I'm really interested in even just software that I never use personally. Games like Fortnite, for example, and us having virtual. I mean, this brings us back onto music, but having like virtual shows in Fortnite and in other pieces, other systems like that, I think is really intriguing to me. And I think the start of something huge that's really going to change the world forever, and make the world even smaller than it already is. So I think, I've been to a couple virtual concerts, virtual gigs since this whole thing happened. And I think that idea of really being able to immerse ourselves in these virtual spaces and virtual worlds and be able to share them with people that are on the other side of the planet, I think that's really fascinating for me. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I mean, how many people were in Fortnite for like Travis Scott's show? I mean, millions, right? And you only have to somehow combine VR into that, and I mean that's what's really exciting to me. Definitely not something I'm personally working on, but something that really does fascinate me. In fact, it reminds me of when I was at university and I was studying music technology. We had a whole like course 1 year that was based in Second Life. Do you remember Second Life?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it was really interesting because Second Life was a bit like Minecraft in a way, right? There was a way to kind of build the world around you. And so the players involved in Second Life, not only did you have your own avatar, your own kind of persona, you were able to program and build the world that you lived in. And so I would be just at home having this lesson on audio engineering in a studio that we had made ourselves with the rest of my classmates inside Second Life. And that's going back, almost a decade now. So a long way back. And I think that, things like World of Warcraft, that kind of very much lent itself to the gaming world. But I think we're starting to find that much more in popular culture now, probably because of the pandemic sort of pushing everybody online and pushing people that maybe were, less comfortable being in these kind of virtual environments. It's pushed them to have to kind of learn and accept that reality and perhaps grow to love it. So I would say that is a space that really intrigues me. Being a musician, being somebody that's fascinated with the entertainment space and media spaces. I think how we can bring those online, virtualize them, and bring communities together to experience them who are physically very far apart. I think is really fascinating for me. And also, just want to go for a pint with my brothers. If I can do that, that'd be awesome. But yeah, I think that space is fascinating. Yeah.
The sense I have of it, the analogy I've been using is it almost feels like where these connective technologies has been, social media, but even things like video communication and whatnot online, is sort of like early phone lines. Like on one level, when the phone lines first started being put in, it was like, oh my God, I can talk to, but they were terrible. Like I remember even back as a kid, we'd call India and it would be a nightmare what it took, right? But at the time it was glorious. It was like, I can't believe it. I can speak to somebody in India. The fact that it took 20 minutes to connect, the fact that every third word was lost, the fact didn't matter. Looking back on it, it seems so primitive. And so I'm with you. I think, a part of what's happened with COVID that's positive is because we've only been able to rely on distance communication. I think we kind of see, oh, wow, Zoom is really, it's phenomenal that we have it. And yet, my goodness, how primitive is it in terms of the richness of what being with somebody can be like. And I think there's so many, very rapid experiments that are already going on that have gotten funded now because people see the relevance. And I think the next 5 years is really interesting for connective technologies at scale.
Yeah. Like as we start to become digital natives, right? Which is maybe been more of a subculture and, until more recently. It's funny, it's the second time I'm going to mention WordPress in the school. I never thought that would come up. But the whole idea of gravatar, I don't know if you know about that, but it's the idea of having like an avatar, which traditionally is just a picture of you tied to an email address that no matter what WordPress site you comment on, you have the same avatar. Right. So that's an old thing that's been around for a long time. But there are companies now that are building technologies that allow you to have an avatar version of yourself that you could be using in Fortnite, but also in World of Warcraft and also in these other environments. So starting to create these kind of like digital first versions of ourselves. And for sure there are going to be companies that spring up that sell clothing and brands that are aimed at your avatar, at your digital version of yourself. It's very Ready Player One. And again, to your point earlier, we've got to be careful about that kind of technology as we do with most tech. But that certainly is fascinating to me. The technology has always made the world smaller. Phone lines for sure were one of the first in doing that. And I think we've seen a rapid growth in that space over the last year now.
Right.
So fascinated to see how that's going to continue to grow for sure.
Yeah, I was just introduced last night to the concept of self-sovereign identity. I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of movement to be a digital kind of identity, and so your gravatar is just reminding me of that, right?
Right. That's exactly what I mean. I feel like gravatar was kind of like a very early stage way of thinking about that. Right at the kind of dawn of the sort of internet era, I guess. But exactly that. That's sort of like the modern take on it.
Right.
And, you know, we do have millions of people meeting up in these virtual worlds right now, right? Whether it's Call of Duty, Fortnite, World of Warcraft, whatever it might be, they tend to be gaming platforms. But when Fortnite started introducing these shows, these kind of like this entertainment side of it, that's a whole different world opening up there. So yeah, that's a fascinating space. I appreciate that question. Actually, it's kind of got my mind going in all sorts of different directions now.
Yeah. So one of the things I plan on doing this summer, and actually we just were talking about it on Monday, in terms of just beginning to plan, is we're definitely going to host at least one and maybe three over the summer extended sort of group versions of this, but in public, maybe outside at the amphitheater. Okay. And, you know, so there's a guy, actually the very last Unstuck, Sam McKee, he's out west, but I think I can probably get him to come out. He's doing amazing, like bleeding edge work with Avangrid of all people on immersive reality for training, because, you know, they've got people who work on electrical lines where if you can simulate that whole thing, you just eliminate all of the safety concerns while still being able to, right? Mm-hmm. We've got a couple other people who are, you know, sort of, playing in a couple of these domains that I think is really interesting. And I'd love to get, you know, maybe 4 or 5 of us in an extended kind of 3-hour conversation to really start to kind of, not a TED talk, but actually a conversation, and just kind of see where the conversation goes in these areas, I think. So you'll definitely get an invite to that. I'd love to have you in that conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to be. I mean, we've had to have a real pivot, as all businesses have, but we've had to really pivot how we do things at Digital Surgeons. And like, one of the interesting things, I actually spoke about this at Inventures conference, which I was supposed to be going to Canada for, and ended up having to do remote, which actually fed into my topic very nicely. But you know, there's a big kind of in-person collaborative vibe to what we do at Digital Surgeons, right? We do this idea of workshops. Whether it's a client that's going to be working with us on branding or a new website or whatever it might be, or if we go into businesses in order to help them innovate and help them utilize design thinking and things like that to kind of, you know, move their business forward. It's a very tactile, in-person, post-it notes everywhere. In fact, like to talk about avatars, my avatar for the longest time was me sitting like this in front of a whiteboard wall of like 3-day, you know, the results of a 3-day workshop. Right. So how do you replicate that online in a virtual space? And to be honest, I think we're all a little bit worried about it. Right. But there's a number of tools and there's a number of ways to bring that to life. And I think there's improvements we can still make, but I think we've done pretty well. So, you know, there's a bunch of tools, but, you know, Miro is a very popular one for kind of whiteboarding. We combine that with Zoom. If you have the right audio settings in Zoom, then you can broadcast music to people. And so there's, you know, different ways that we can try and replicate this kind of in-person, you know, the sort of like creativity that comes with just those accidental like collisions you have with people in person, and try and replicate those virtually. And it's difficult, especially for myself, like managing creative teams, managing engineers and creatives. Like the best, when we were in the office, one of the best sort of accidents that happens is when you just happen to be walking past somebody and you see what they're working on, or you hear a conversation, you just dive in. How do you replicate that in Slack? It's really difficult. Yep. So I mean, I appreciate that. I'd love to be involved in those kind of conversations. Definitely something that fascinates me. We've got a long way to go until we can kind of replicate this world in the virtual space. And then there'll be a whole, you know, ethical debate about, you know, what is real. Then we get into the world of the Matrix, you know, and that's also fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I am simultaneously fascinated by all these kind of conversations, but also increasingly clear that you kids got to worry about this stuff, because by the time it starts to get real, I'm on a beach in Jamaica, just ending, just, you know, playing out my last couple of decades. Like I'm not going to live to see this stuff play out, right? This is another 30, 40, 50 years. Maybe I'll be around in 50 years. It's unlikely. You'll be around in 50 years. And so you're going to see how this plays out. Yeah. So I try not to get too overly enthusiastic about it, because it's a movie I'm only going to get to see part of.
Right. That's a good way to look at it. I mean, this is a really bad time in the conversation to bring a topic like this up when we only have a few minutes left. But you mentioned physics earlier, something I'm fascinated by, especially quantum mechanics. I'm super interested in that. You know, I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, but it's something I'm kind of interested in on the side, read a lot of books and that kind of thing. And I'm fascinated with the idea of simulation theory. And I think we might well be, if we're not already in a simulation, as the simulation argument goes, we could be at the beginning of creating that. So I don't know if we do another unstuck on that topic, but
yeah, I think that's great.
Certainly the way I see it going. You know,
I am so happy to see mainstream physics, mainstream Western physics catch up with 5,000-year-old Hinduism.
yes,
and acknowledge the possibility that this whole thing is an illusion.
Yeah. So actually, a book I'm reading right now is something deeply hidden by Sean Carroll, and he actually talks about exactly that. And you know, the kind of blending of physics and philosophy, and in the Western world, how a lot of these kind of like philosophical conversations would be pushed away and not counted as science, and are finally starting to be brought into the kind of mainstream world of physics. As I said, I'm no expert. I just find it really interesting and like to read about it.
Yeah.
I know what I'm talking about.
I'll make you a deal. We will definitely do another conversation if you're interested in that sort of thing. I've been digging into those kind of overlaps since way back. The Tao of Physics, Fajit Kapra back in the 70s.
Okay.
That whole stream. James Glick. Are you familiar with Douglas Hofstadter, the Gödel, Asher, Bach?
No, I don't.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we got to get you a copy of Gödel, Asher, Bach. It's dense, but it is one of the great texts of all time. That man's if there are aliens on the planet, he's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love the recommendation. Let me dig into that. Yeah, I'm really interested in Sean Carroll and also Nick Bostrom from Simulation Theory. And I think, I'm very interested in 3D graphics recently, and that's kind of a technology I've been exploring. And the more kind of 3D work you do, especially in the world of gaming, you realize what goes into faking these simulations, which is really all a computer game is, right? It's faking reality. And again, really bad time to bring this kind of depth of conversation up. But if you look at the world of quantum mechanics, right, and the way that particles behave at the subatomic level, there's a lot of similarity between that and how we build 3D graphics, how we build computer systems, right? You don't render certain parts of the landscape until the user looks at them, which if you know anything about quantum mechanics is the whole kind of measurement problem and the Copenhagen.
Right. So we're definitely going to do a follow up on this if you're up for it. And what's occurring to me is I don't know why it didn't occur to me that since we're now virtual on these things, there's no reason why this can't be 3 people because there's somebody else I'd love to bring into the conversation. We're going to book this. We're going to do a 3-way conversation. You're going to love this guy. He's also out west. We're going to do a 3-way conversation on are we in a simulation and
oh man,
I'd have a rigorous conversation about it. Yeah,
I would love to do that. I definitely feel like I need to caveat that I am not an expert in physics by any means, but I read far too much about that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I would love that. Yeah,
I'll be the in-house Easterner because I don't know a whole lot about the science either. He's going to bring the hardcore science, and you bring the curiosity and the self-learned stuff. Yeah,
awesome. Cool. I love it.
Adam, this is great. I so appreciate you taking the time. We'll definitely book that other session. And listen, I didn't say it up front. I'll say it now publicly, and you know this, but I just deeply appreciate how committed you are to our students here, how just insanely generous you've been prior to my tenure, during my tenure, with giving these guys time. It's phenomenal. So thank you on behalf of the whole crew here.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the whole team they have over there, and the students are amazing, and I just love helping out. And yeah, thank you for the invite. Thanks for having me. This was awesome, and I very much look forward to that follow-up for sure.
Excellent. Good. Digitalsurgeons.com. And then you got any, I didn't even know you played guitar. So now I got to make sure, you got any music out there? Any Bandcamp sites or SoundCloud or anything we can go to?
Yeah. So actually you can find the music I make with the vocalist I mentioned earlier. So Cam Nichols, you can find us on Spotify, Amazon Music, all the major streaming platforms as Cam and Sound. So that's CAM for Cam, and sound. I go by Sound Chambers as like the
Okay.
DJ in that space. Unfortunately, it's a little early, but I'm also working on a new musical venture where I'm really trying to bring those two passions I mentioned earlier together of programming and audio, and I'm trying to create a sort of interactive musical series.
Right.
So maybe when we do the follow-up, I'll have more information on that.
Okay.
Yeah, digitalsurgeons.com. Learn more about us there. All of my writing and stuff is on there, and I just launched a new website as well, chambaz.tech. That's CHAMBAZ.tech, and all links to my other social media are on there, so you can.
Cool. All right, and Cam and Sound on Spotify and all the services.
Awesome.
Again, Adam, thank you, and we'll see you around the hallways here.
Cheers. Great to speak to you.
All right.